Want to hear 25 remote work experts share their amazing strategies and processes for building successful remote work companies and remote team? We've got speakers from leading companies like Thinkific, Evergreen Profits, Dynamite Circle, and Tribe Theory, and more. Register for your free ticket now at www.remotebusinesssummit.com.
That's right, www.remotebusinesssummit.com. We'll see you there, November 18 to 22.
Woohoo! Welcome to Founders Connect podcast. We help lifestyle entrepreneurs to grow their business online and create a happier marriage.
Did you know that approximately 45% of marriages end up in divorce and 65% of all startups fail due to founder conflicts? Well, we're here to change that.
Each week we bring you an inspiring guest and practical tips to help you with business, relationships, and sustainable living. Now let the fun begin! Hi, I'm Cindy Pham.
And I'm Anthony Chansamuth.
And we're from Founders Connect.
And I have with me Liam Martin, who is a serial entrepreneur who runs Time Doctor and Staff.com, one of the most popular time tracking and productivity tools used on the planet and used by the top brands today. He's also a co-organizer of the world's largest remote work conference, which is Running Remote. And I think the last one you guys did was in Bali, and you're headed to Austin. Is that right?
That's it. Yep. Next year.
Rocking. Okay, so why don't we just open up with just a bit of your background and how you became a serial entrepreneur? Like, what were you doing before you were a serial entrepreneur?
Sure. I was failing at being a university lecturer. I was in grad school, actually at McGill University, and I had been a teaching assistant for about 7 years, and they had given me my own class. It was a first-year sociology class. Started with about 300 students, ended up with a little bit more than 150 by the end of the semester. And I received some of the worst professor reviews in the department's history, which I believe was about 250 years of departmental history. So it was not very good. And I remember going into my supervisor's office and saying, I don't think I'm very good at this. And he said, no, you're not. And then I thought to myself, okay, so where does that leave me? And he said, you've got to get really good at this lecturing thing if you really plan to enter academia, because it's a central part of the way that you exist inside of academia. So 4 weeks later, I threw one of the most horrible master's thesis under his door, and I was out into the real world. And I turned that into my very first remote business, which was an online tutoring company.
Wow.
And we grew that to dozens of tutors throughout North America and Europe. We were teaching people pre-med prerequisites for entry into medical school. And one of the biggest problems that I had was trying to actually understand how long a tutor worked for a student. So we would bill a student for 10 hours, and then the student would say, well, I only worked with my tutor for 5 hours. Then I'd have to go to the tutor and say, did you work with Jimmy for 5 hours or 10 hours? And the tutor would say, of course, for 10 hours, that's what I billed. So then I'd end up having a student for 5 hours, but paying the tutor for the full 10 hours. And that was restrained business. So then that came to Time Doctor, which was the tool that I could use to really scale that business to the next level.
Yeah, you're kind of scratching your own itch. Here's the problem we've got with time tracking and you know, teachers claiming one thing and then students saying another thing. And how do we make sure that both, you know, who's telling the truth really? And that's a really good problem.
So now with that tool, literally you could say, well, I didn't work with 10 hours with you. I worked for 10 hours, 3 minutes and 22 seconds. And here's everything that I did. It's all itemized so that you can see very clearly exactly what type of work was done. And then secondarily, how productively you actually end up doing work. That's the big thing that Time Doctor does right now. We kind of call ourselves like a Fitbit for work. So we analyze all of our team's data, and then we figure out how efficiently someone does that particular task. So I'm currently doing my podcast task right now, which is basically documented inside of Time Doctor. The other 393 interviews I've done over the last 3 years, I can see it on my dashboard right now, can get added into that. I know exactly how much one of these things costs, what's the ROI of it, basically what are the dollars and cents of operating a remote business.
That's really powerful and something obviously people watching this and listening to this are going to love. So one of my favorite questions here is, what's a courageous decision that you've made in your life and what's actually got you to where you are today?
Letting myself be an entrepreneur, actually. That's probably something, that's the first thing that's jumping in my mind. A lot of entrepreneurs that know that they're entrepreneurs don't pursue entrepreneurship because it's a very risky endeavor. And for everyone, you currently see the social network, you see Zuckerberg, you see all of these billionaires that are floating around. But in reality, actually, entering entrepreneurship actually will make you a lot less than getting a regular job when it all kind of boils down to it. And so taking that risk was something that was probably, in my opinion, courageous. I could have gotten jobs that made me a lot more money in the short term. Now I'm making a lot more money in the long term, which is really fantastic. But it was also just recognizing who I was deep down inside. And I think that if people are watching this right now, if you know that you're an entrepreneur, you're okay. If you don't know, you're probably not. And I think that's kind of one of the best pieces of advice that I usually give to people that are trying to get into entrepreneurship is I've been fired or I have quit almost every job I've had within 3 months. I think the longest I went with working for somebody else was 3 months. And I just knew that if I didn't enter entrepreneurship, I wouldn't be able to support myself. And if you're in that boat, you're definitely an entrepreneur. You should work for yourself. Working for someone else is just not going to cut it. If you're not like that, then you might want to kind of look very, very closely at entrepreneurship and figure out whether that's the right direction for you.
So when that came up into your mind, like this is the way I've got to go. I can't work for someone for a long time. Like that's really not my jam. Did you have conversations with family members? Did you talk about, to your partner, like what came up in that? Because for some people, there's the job is a safety blanket, right? Like I can just get paid my check every month. I know how much income I'm going to get. Don't need to worry about chasing clients and doing all these sort of things. Yeah. And so you're right. Like it is a courageous decision to make, right? But it's not for everyone. And for you, what was going through your mind when you kind of went, okay, well, this lecturing gig is really not working out here. How did you even start with Time Doctor? Like, what did that look like in the early days?
Sure. So I'll answer the first question first. Your family will generally not be super supportive of entrepreneurship, unfortunately. At least mine wasn't. And in most of the experiences that I've had with people that have become entrepreneurs, their family is usually pretty apprehensive about you pursuing that line of work, entering that type of profession. My answer to that is only pay attention to people that have done it. If your mom and dad and cousin and uncle say, hey, maybe you should go get that government job, or maybe you should go get that corporate job, work for Deloitte, something like that. Unless they've actually been successful entrepreneurs, I would not pay attention to their opinion. If a successful entrepreneur tells you you shouldn't be an entrepreneur, that's a piece of opinion that I might pay attention to. And that's something that, because you'll get an overwhelming amount of people that will tell you that it's the wrong decision, but are those people actually qualified to assess whether or not it's the right decision or not? And I would say only entrepreneurs can actually make that decision for you. So that's something that I would really touch on.
That's a good tip. I feel that advice applies to even if you want to get a job and what career you want to get into. If you want to become a lawyer and no one in your family's ever been through legal studies, they're not qualified to tell you that answer either, really.
So a little side story here. My partner of the last 6 years, she is a professional mermaid. I've got mermaid crap everywhere here. So she runs about 16 mermaid schools throughout North America and the Middle East. The first year that she ran her business, I think she made about $250,000 and she had to invest $20,000 into that business to be successful. Everyone was telling her that it was not a successful business. But if you do $250,000 and you had to invest $20,000 of startup costs into a business that's now generating $250,000 a year, that's an incredibly successful business. And I kind of brought her through the dollars and cents and said, if you change nothing, if you make exactly the same amount of revenue, and you're probably going to make more, you're going to clear at least $100,000 because there's all these startup costs that are connected to it. So there's all of these people that will tell you it's the wrong decision, but they don't have license to actually assess whether it's the right decision or not. So you have to actually go out and find those types of people. Now, with regards to Time Doctor was honestly just a tool that scratched my own itch, as you talked about before. We had this big problem, and I've been doing remote work for about 15 years. Back in that day, it was kind of called telework.
Teleworking, yeah.
Teleworking, yeah. And we kind of still use that term, but not really anymore. It's like remote, digital nomad, outsourcing, location independence. All of these terms are kind of thrown around, but fundamentally they all mean the same thing, which is the ability to be able to work from your computer. And I realized that there was a major infrastructure hole that we needed to solve, which was when we talk to large clients that are running large remote teams, the number one question we get is, well, how do I know they're actually going to be working when they're working from home? And Time Doctor is one of those tools that completely solves that problem for them to know, okay, not only can you know what they're doing, but more importantly, you can actually empower them to become more productive, which is what we actually really like to focus on
right.
at Time Doctor.
You are listening to the Founders Connect podcast, helping lifestyle entrepreneurs to grow their business online and create a happier marriage. Now back to the show.
What's your response to the thought that if you tracking people's, like what, with screen captures and whatever it may be, like that doesn't kind of stifles, it's micromanagement, right? So it's like, how do you deal with that? Because personally, I wouldn't like being monitored in that way. How have you dealt with that? Has that come up before with some of your clients? And what are your thoughts around that?
Absolutely. So I think it's the way that you use it. So as an example, right now, I'm using Time Doctor to measure this task along with everything else that I do throughout my work day and week. And everyone else in the company can see my own data. So what we do in the organization is everyone can see everyone else's data. And then that allows you to know, well, I'm working 40 hours per week. If you want to look at all my data, you can. It's absolutely no problem. And if I'm working 40 hours per week, maybe you should be working 40 hours per week as well. And that seems to solve a lot of those problems that people have with measurement. Now, secondarily to that, there are always people that are quite apprehensive about measurement. And I usually like to ask them in a deeper way, why? And I think it comes down to, yes, there's a monitoring component, but also there might be another component of being critiqued for your overall productivity. And I think if you can open that conversation, or you can address that conversation in an open way, one of the big open with their own data, then it allows you to be able to communicate with people and say, yeah, okay, this is something that we do as a company policy. Everyone in the organization does it. And it's not something where I have an informational advantage over you. Everyone is at the same level. And if anyone wants to come in and critique how I'm doing my job, I'm more than happy to get that type of feedback from some of the employees in the company.
Yeah. So what it sounds like to me is it basically opens the opportunity to have conversations around culture. And if your culture is one that has holes in it or has some inherent trust issues, then this is just going to highlight that. Like it's not going to, right? Like it doesn't create that culture. It's what you have already. And then
we have a perfect example. Someone that I like to pick on a little bit is about 6 months ago, one of our top salespeople. So they won the sales month. So they made the most money in that particular month. But they worked 240 hours during that month. So they were working a massive amount of overtime. And then the second place person worked 140 hours to accomplish what was, I think, about 100 in MRR less money.
Right.
And she was very happy that she hit that target. And I congratulated her on that target. But I said, you're not being efficient with your time. I actually broke down revenue generated per hour. You'd be last place on the team. So how are you going to try to be able to optimize this so you're not working 24/7, because right now you're working very inefficiently, and we need to be able to figure out how to get you to work a lot more efficiently. And that's the way that we think about things, is how can we make people more efficient in their jobs, more productive, because that makes for, number one, a much more productive company, but then also it makes for much more productive people that also result in happier people. People that work 240 hours a month are not very happy people.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a really smart way to use data as well, because you can say, I work so much, and then you say, well, let's see what the reality of that is. And like you say, what's the productivity ratio if you were to look at it? So that's really cool. So let's jump into, you're going to be talking on the summit about metrics and the type of metrics you need to be tracking to grow and scale a remote business? And where are you at with your companies? How many team members do you have? And is it all remote, or is it part remote, part on-site? How does it work for you?
So we have approximately 100 remote employees. They're in 32 different countries right now. We've always been remote first, 100% remote first. We've never had any on-premise employees. We actually had, at one point, we had half a dozen offices, which we called crash pads, which were generally for people to just kind of float into. So we had one in Cairo, in Sydney, here in Ottawa, Canada, a bunch of other, New Jersey, a couple other cities. And we actually ended up cutting all but two because they were just being underutilized so much. So a lot of our people, they really do just adopt and embrace remote work, and they don't actually want to go into an office. So we actually ended up, we realized it was a huge waste of money.
That's such a good demonstration of a myth around if you're sitting in an office space together, that you're going to be more productive. And there's a lot of research that would support the opposite argument, which is, that's actually not the case, because you can be sitting in a room together and paying a lot of a lease or rent or something like that. So there's a cost to the business. But like you say, that does not guarantee productivity. Amazing job doing what you've done. So why do you think metrics are important to track when you're trying to build a business like you have?
Well, I think what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. And so we measure all of those metrics to be able to make sure that we're able to optimize for them. Our company culture is a culture of quantitative measurement of all things. So we measure how many leads we get in the business. We measure how much money we're making. We measure our churn rate. We also measure the overall productivity of all of our team members and figure out what we can do to be able to make them more productive. I would say that's probably one of our kind of secret sauces as to how we've been so successful in the market, is we're so focused on measuring exactly what's going on and figuring out how we can optimize a particular process or person. We've realized in some cases, if we just remove one, we can actually have someone spend 10x the amount of time on income generating activities where we wouldn't have that same time deployed in other departments. So we have a lot of those types of instances where we kind of almost look at the workflow of how we actually accomplish a large, complicated task. And then we can boil down into it and say, oh, okay, you know what? It looks like salespeople, as an example, should never be doing lead generation. It's an inefficient use of their time. So once we actually stopped salespeople from doing lead generation and we hired people specifically to do lead generation, we increased sales by, I think, 40%, wow, which was awe-inspiring. When you see that, we just realized, well, where are we putting our time? I'll give you another example is I don't work on Tuesday afternoons at all. And I only discovered this after about 6 months of using Time Doctor. My productivity was incredibly low on Tuesday afternoons. And I don't know if I believe you're in Australia, right?
Yes, I'm in the Gold Coast, correct.
Yeah, Gold Coast. So beautiful place, by the way. I don't know whether or not you have cheap movie Tuesdays there.
Yes, we do.
In Canada, we have half price Tuesdays for movies. And the phone calls start at around 2 p.m. Do you want to go see Batman or Superman? I want to see Superman. Well, Suzanne wants to go see Batman. Why don't you call her and find out what's going on? Are you just going to see the 4 o'clock showing or the 7 o'clock showing? Does John want to come? Does, Charlie want to come? And it was just this constant barrage of distractions. So I realized by actually not working on Tuesday afternoons, it increased my productivity for the week. It's very counterintuitive, but it comes from the basis of this conceptualization that the 9 to 5 40-hour work week is the most efficient way to work. When in reality, this was started during the Industrial Revolution, and it's a model that no longer applies to the way that we currently work. I'm currently talking to you at 11:57 p.m., and it's quite late for me, but I'm in good spirits. I think this is a good conversation, and I'm in the flow. I'm working relatively well. If I were in the classic model, I wouldn't be working at 11:57 p.m., but I am. So I think work really needs to change, and the best way to be able to do that is to actually measure it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Love that. We're going to wrap up here now. I want you to finish this sentence if you give it a go, Liam. It's not about metrics. What is it really about?
Productivity.
Love it. Awesome. Okay. And so we're going to be on the summit. We're going to dive deeper into metrics and how do you measure them and sort of lessons and maybe some mistakes that you've had along the way. Why you decided to be part of the Remote Work Summit?
For me, I think that our company is really focused on a core mission statement, which is empowering everyone on planet Earth to work wherever they want, whenever they want. That applies to everything that we do. It's what we say every time we have a large team meeting is that's our mission statement. That's what we're focused on. So I think being on a summit like this creates great alignment and it helps us serve that mission.
Amazing. Love it. Okay. So guys, head over to remotebusinesssummit.com to grab your free ticket and join myself and Liam and 24 other speakers and experts on remote work. And we will see you there. Liam, we'll see you in the summit.
Thanks for tuning in. And remember to live passionately,
purposefully,
and confidently. Till next time.